and welcome to a new episode of PR360. And I'm your host, Brett Dice. If you could please subscribe to PR360 on all your favorite podcasting hosting sites and leave a 5-star review as well. And please subscribe to the YouTube page as well. But with me, I have Dan with me, and he has a 15-year marketing career spanning both agency and client side with me. And he's also been working a lot about social media, which is what we're going to be talking about today because everybody needs to know about social media. It's the thing that we live and die by, I guess, sometimes. But
Yeah.
hey, we're glad for Dan to be on the show. So welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks so much, Brett. It's great to be here.
And my first question is all my guests is, are you a coffee or tea drinker?
Definitely coffee. I can't start my day without some sort of espresso drink that I'll make at home. But I only recently realized actually that I like regular coffee. I was not a fan for a long time, and tea doesn't do it for me either. So espresso drinks all the way.
So you're basically like strict espresso or drip coffee as well.
I'll do some drip coffee, but it's mostly like cappuccinos, lattes,
Uh,
and you know, last weekend I realized that what I thought was a macchiato isn't really a macchiato. So apparently, what Starbucks will give you is not a real macchiato. So I learned that the hard way.
no, for those out there, yes, macchiatos are about a 3-ounce cup. It's about this big, and it's really, really small. I was a barista, so I
Yeah.
know what an actual macchiato
Mhm.
is. So for those of you who know, Starbucks does not actually make a macchiato. It's basically just another latte.
Yeah.
But
I'm not complaining though. I love them.
fair enough. But I gave a brief summary of your expertise. Can you give us or give our audience a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I started in marketing a good 15 or so years ago, and I started on the agency side. I was working. I'm New York based, so I've been working for a number of New York agencies on in a variety of marketing disciplines. I started off in direct mail. Sending direct mail to AARP recipients, so that was a lot of fun, especially right out of school. And I've done display marketing and event marketing, and it wasn't until my last agency, 360i, when I really just stumbled into social media marketing and everything seemed to click. It's almost like everything that I had been doing before that was testing me out in a way, or I was testing different variations of marketing. But I realized that social media marketing was really the thing that helps me to merge both sides of my brain in a way that really felt impactful to me. So when I was at 360i, I was working on a variety of mostly NBC Universal brands with an emphasis on USA Network. Entertainment is a personal passion of mine in TV, so it's something that, with the exception of a detour here and there, is I've been pretty much doing ever since. And I'm currently now, as of a few weeks ago, actually, I just started at Paramount. I'm working at Paramount Plus as Senior Director of Social Strategy, working or will be working with the various international regions as they launch Paramount Plus to help them with their organic social. So my specialization in a nutshell is entertainment, social media marketing, and community building.
Gotcha. And then for PR pros that may have not kept up with social media, what can you tell them about the current state of social media right now?
Yeah, it's a really funny question because the first thing I would always say is that the current state is never current for very long. So that's one thing that we know for sure in social media, is that it's constantly changing, and we talk about it as a 24/7 business, and that's very much true. There's always platform updates and trends and news items to keep track of, and that alone takes a lot of work. But beyond that, and this is current, but it's also recent past, is a reminder that video is king. Regardless of what platform you're on, pretty much it's very video centric. Instagram, I think, was most recently the platform that shifted in that direction. And but it's not just video for video's sake. It's important to build for each platform. So I would always remind people of that. I've definitely been in situations where a trailer might be cut, or there's some sort of video produced for a website or broadcast TV that is given to us as the social media managers, and we're told basically slap it on Facebook and call it a day. We know that that doesn't work. That's a lot of people, I'm sure, who are listening who work in social are have that experience. That's a very common experience to have. But in social, it's super important to build specifically for the platform and preferably to use the native tools that the platform offers also. That algorithmically will help you.
Gotcha. And then, I mean, what have you learned from creating Avid fans of like Psych and Burn Notice? Yes, I actually am a psycho. If people don't
Yeah.
know, that's the Avid fans of this TV show Psych.
Yeah. So I worked on Psych and Burn Notice and Suits for a bit, and some other shows. I wish I could take credit for building those fandoms. The reality is I came on as the social media manager for those shows, particularly Psych and Burn Notice during their final seasons. So I had not, full confession, I had not watched a single episode of either show before I took on that challenge. So it was like a kid in a candy store. You don't see it that much at all these days, where you're working on a brand that has a super active and vocal following. It's very hard these days, as probably most people know, to get that organic reach and engagement. Back in those days, in the like 2012, 2013, it was a little bit easier, and you had these fandoms that were so vocal. One thing I learned working with them was the importance of really immersing yourself in the brand and knowing the brand very well. You might appreciate, Brett, that I was live tweeting an episode of Psych once. It was final season episode, and Felicia
Mhm.
Rashad made her appearance. I tweeted, "Hey psychos, let's welcome Felicia Rashad to the Psych family." And that was such a big faux pas. I did not know that she was a recurring character on the show. That was the first and only appearance she made during that season. So the client emailed me within a minute or so, basically screaming, "Take it down, take it down." And it was only up for a couple minutes, but in those couple minutes, there were already a couple comments from people saying, "What are you talking about? She's been a part of this family." So when you're working on an active fandom, it's super important to really fully immerse yourself, and and preferably be a fan yourself. I can say that along the latter part of what I was just saying, the very first show I ever worked on was a reality show for E! Called Chasing the Saturdays. It was about this British singing group that was known and established in the UK, but unknown in the US. And the concept of the show was they were trying to break into the US market. So they were out in LA recording their first American album. And I was really fortunate that I had a few months to really get to know this band, not meet them personally, but get to know their music and what each individual member was about before the show premiered. So by the time it premiered, I was so fully immersed in their world that I was able to communicate as a fan to now fellow fans, and that made a huge difference.
Gotcha. I mean, that even goes to another question. I'm like, how does someone actually do what you do going into something so popular and trying to keep it all together? Because I mean, you made one faux pas, and I'm pretty sure a lot of PR pros going into like brands are like, okay, I don't know what's going on, and I'm trying to like grab everything I can around this. So, how do you keep it all, I guess, all sane for yourself?
It's it's funny. I was right before this. I was listening to another episode of this podcast, and you had a PR professional on who said that it's PR, not ER, and I would kind of treat it the same way. Social media. I had a manager once who was referring to some kind of social media emergency, and I thought that was um, almost a ridiculous way of looking at things. We take our jobs very very seriously, but at the end of the day, we're not saving lives for the most part with the work that we're doing. So just keeping that perspective, I think, is always important. But at the same time, it's not something that you want to take too lightly. You really want to understand the audience. It's the first rule of any marketing discipline: is know your audience, know what makes them tick, know their demographics, their psychographics, and understand where they're at, and hopefully you can meet them there. And once you're able to, it's in theory should be a little bit more smooth sailing.
Gotcha. And then how can PR pros actually create that enthusiasm in their brand? Because, like I said, with Psych and Burn Notice, there was a lot of enthusiasm. There still is with Psych. I think
Yeah.
the recent third movie came out, what, last year or something like that? There's still a
Yep.
lot of excitement around it. So, how do you keep creating that too?
Yeah, that's not easy to do. With Psych and Burn Notice, these are shows that have extremely well established social voices. We'll talk a lot about social voice or social tone of voice. It's something that every brand wants, but not every brand has been able to master, and it does take a lot of time to identify what that voice or that persona is for the brand. At the end of the day, people don't want to engage with cold, faceless corporate entities. They want to engage with a human being, and they don't really want to be sold to either. When you're talking with your friend probably isn't trying to sell you things in the midst of your conversation. Same thing with a brand. It shouldn't be, you can't get rid of those posts that say tune in or buy now or whatnot, but that should not be the crux of everything that you're posting. It's really about community building. When you think about yourself in terms of social voice, it's super important, I think, to view yourself as the brand, as a human being, and ask yourself questions like, if I were a human, what objects would I carry around with myself? Which hobbies would I have? If I were in high school, which superlative would I win? I'd be voted most likely to what? You ask these sorts of questions, and when you involve the right people and think through it that way, you start to identify this very clear persona of who the brand is, and you can start speaking as that brand. And that's where that authenticity and that human side comes out, and that's what people want to embrace and feel connected to. It's
So
also important, I think, just to take interest in your fans. Again, knowing who they are and making sure that you're giving as much as you're taking. It's not just about posting and calling it a day. There's also this other side of social that a lot of brands aren't very good at, and that's what I once heard referred to as being a good social citizen, which is basically acting as a human being on the platform. So thinking about how humans engage, they scroll through their feeds. Brands can do that too. You can look for conversations and engage without those people having to come to you first. But you have to do it in a way that feels authentic to you. No one wants you to butt into a conversation where you don't belong, because it can feel very disingenuous. And that's where there's a line to straddle. But it's important to seek those conversations out.
So it's almost like within the brand guidelines, we should start creating like a social voice for the brand. So if new people come on, or if people forget what the social voice is, at least they can come back and be like, oh, yeah, that's what it's all about. So people don't get confused about it. Cause pretty sure it can get confusing when you're coming in new, or you've been on vacation for a while and you just brain farted or whatever. Is that something that should happen now?
Absolutely. Something we did at 360i that I've implemented in succeeding jobs is essentially a one sheet. So basically, you would go through the social voice exercise. And by the way, I don't call it social tone of voice anymore. It's sometimes I still will, and most people do. But I've come to recognize the difference between voice and tone. Your voice being how you sound, how you come across, and the tone is how you flex that voice depending on what platform you're on, who you're speaking to. There is flexibility there. But this one sheet ultimately paints the portrait of your persona. And that's what I do now. So after a couple rounds of this exercise that I would do, it would result in this final one sheet that explains who the persona is, written on in the first person from their behalf. And it would include things like guardrails and adjectives. We are this, but we're not that. And it's a single sheeter, so anyone can pick it up and read it and get a sense of who this person, meaning the brand, is. So the theory is you should be able to pick it up and maybe not nail the voice right away, but at least it'll bring you closer to that.
Mm-hmm. And even with that, how can, or is there any tips that you have for creating that authentic, basically, engagement with the customers or potential customers or fans? Because I know that you said like do some engagement or do some commenting back, but is there any other tips besides that too?
Yeah, there's so many bells and whistles in social. There's a lot of products that you could play with, but I think it's always important, and that's great. But I also think it's important to just go back to the basics sometimes and understand what really drives people and what their basic needs are. A lot of folks just want to be heard, frankly, especially these days. It's a very polarizing time, and everyone has opinions about everything, and they're looking for a venue to share those opinions. So simply asking questions is a great way to get that sort of engagement. So, for example, if you're a TV show, you can post a question that says, "What's your favorite episode? What's your favorite moment from last season? Who are your favorite characters?" This is not innovative. This is something that brands and people do all the time, but I would never underestimate the power of it. A lot of people would just call them question cards. I call them conversation cards because the whole point is that graphic or that video, whatever it may be, is meant to be a starting off point for hopefully a conversation so you can have a one-on-one interaction with your fans. Social is one of the few, if not the only, marketing discipline where you can actually speak to the fans, have them speak back, and have that conversation. So if someone were to answer that question of who their favorite character is, you might want to reply back and have a little bit of an exchange. It takes a little bit more time and commitment to do that, but it's so worth it at the end of the day because it helps them to feel more closely connected to you. They feel like they're being heard, and also it benefits you because now you know some deeper information perhaps about your audience, and you can use that information to optimize your content moving forward to ensure that what you're providing in the future is meeting your fans where they want to be met.
Gotcha. And then, I mean, for the content wise, what should PR pros be focusing on for content in 2022? Should it still be that video, short, or vertical and horizontal video? Should there be some just audio only type of content? Like, what should it be?
uh, Video in 2022 continues to be king. Like I said, that Instagram just, what was it, maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, announced that they were shifting in that direction. So it still continues to be huge, and I don't think that's going anywhere. What I think we're going to be seeing moving forward is different presentations of video. We've it used to be just 16 by 9, and then it kind of merged into 1 by 1. Now it's 9 by 16, depending on the format. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different tools that platforms like TikTok or Instagram will give you with Reels, interactive tools, green screens, sound effects, music, things like that to play with. But what I would say in terms of content that folks should be really focused on, it depends on your brand and your audience. I worked for a brand once where all the best practices that we know in this industry did not work for that brand. The things that were supposed to work didn't, and vice versa. So in that role, I really had to really rethink things and get to know who this audience is. So it's excellent to have best practices. You need those, and they're an excellent foundation and starting point. But don't be afraid to experiment. That's what's one of the great things about social. You can experiment with a lot of different types of content, a lot of different formats. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's gonna disappear at some point. Most content doesn't have a long tail unless you're talking about Pinterest or YouTube to some extent. But experiment but start with video, I would say, and play around there, making sure that what you're doing is again feeling very authentic and not too. It doesn't have to be high gloss. I think a lot of people get intimidated at the thought of video, that they need a whole production crew and professional editing software. It's all right there on your phone. And it doesn't need to be more than that. Your content will look like your fans' content, and again, that's how you appear as a human being to them.
So, I mean, for tips for them for PR pros to get into video if they haven't already is to, I guess, look at their own fans' video and try to emulate them in some way. Is that
Yeah, 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 to some extent, I would say always start with strategy and figure out what your goal is. With anything marketing related, it always starts with a goal, and and yeah, do some social listening. You can find your fans. You can find Facebook groups where your prospective fans may be hanging out. Take a look at the content that they're sharing in those groups, whether it's video or not. That will give you some really great cues into the sorts of things that you might want to experiment with.
gotcha? And then how do you fit social audio into the content strategy? I know it's kind of like the new thing right now for a certain amount of time. I don't know how long it's going to stay, but at least Twitter's finding some type of success with it. I heard LinkedIn's still trying to do it. I think
Mhm.
Facebook just kind of completely just got rid of it. They're like, nope, we're done.
Yeah. I don't think they got rid of it completely. They've merged it with Facebook Live. Live audio, I kind of equate to live streaming video. when was it, 2012, 2013, whenever it was, when Meerkat and Periscope first emerged. I think it was South by Southwest. Meerkat came out and it was the hot new product, and they were doing this thing called live video streaming, and everyone wanted to jump on that bandwagon, and they all did. It's to this day pretty much available on all the major platforms, but it got to a point where it started to really plateau, and those originators, Meerkat, Periscope, just kind of fell by the wayside and are really no longer around. Um, it's That's something that's not going away, but it's no longer the it thing anymore. It's just kind of sitting there in the background, and that's kind of what I'm seeing with live audio. Also, Clubhouse was the Meerkat or the Periscope of live audio, and it's still around, but they are definitely on the decline at the moment. And we're seeing Twitter, for example, they have Spaces, which is a great product, but even behind the scenes, Twitter is pulling staff away from Spaces. Facebook, as I mentioned, merged their live audio rooms with Facebook Live, so there seems to be a little bit less of an emphasis on live audio these days. During the last few years, where people were on lockdown and really hankering for personal connection, wanting to hear people's voices, that's when this really exploded. And now that things are opening up and have been opened up now for a bit, it almost seems like live audio is of less interest. But I don't think it's going to go away for good. I think there's incredible applications for it. You mentioned LinkedIn. I think it's currently in beta, or at the very least, only content creators are allowed to use their live audio events. But when I first heard live audio, I thought this is like being at a conference, and I loved that idea. You have a person or a panel on a virtual stage, and you have dozens or hundreds of people listening, and you can raise your hand, ask a question, perhaps it will be answered, and it just feels like that conference experience. So when it comes to making that experience accessible for more people, I can see LinkedIn kind of leaning in that direction. So they seem to be the platform that's really building up their audio tools right now, whereas everybody else is either investing less in them or just kind of letting them stay relatively flat. I love the idea of live audio, but if I'm honest, I personally don't really consume a whole lot of it myself. And I think that's something that you would see with a lot of folks, but I don't think it's going away. I think we're going to find new applications for it.
Gotcha. I mean, that leads into my next question. What is next for social media? I mean, we said in the top that it's always changing. So what is next? Is it about YouTube and podcasting, which is their new big thing? What's next for social media?
Yeah, there's podcasting is an interesting one. Facebook just kind of discontinued its own podcasting product. Didn't really give it much of a shot. But podcasting is still super important, of course, and extremely popular. So I'm very curious to see how other platforms may or may not embrace it. Aside from that, I think everyone's probably tired of hearing about the metaverse and all of that. I heard someone once refer to VR and AR not as the metaverse, but as an entry point to it, and I thought that was a smart way of looking at it because no one really knows what it is. But in terms of beyond that, what's next? I think we're starting to see some of it, and we're probably going to see a lot more. Is platforms releasing or platforms recognizing the need of controls to help users with their mental health and safety. We've been seeing a lot more of that lately. TikTok, I think it was just recently announced their screen time controls. Instagram and Snapchat are implementing parental controls. Meta, of course, is always under the microscope with this, particularly with younger users. But over these last couple of years, especially with the polarization of the world, with everything that's going on that's so negative, it's hard to maintain a level head these days. So, and people spend increasingly more time on social media. So I can see a lot more of these sort of tactics to help mitigate any horrible long-term effects. Of course, we don't know if any of these things are going to work. I haven't seen any proof of it yet, and I don't know if that will be made available anytime soon. But I do appreciate that more platforms are starting to take mental health more seriously.
Gotcha. And then, fun question for you: what social network do you love to use the most personally?
I'm on most of them. Mine is probably not the most obvious answer. I really like LinkedIn. I think it's a really smart platform. They're playing around with a lot of new tools and products and functionality. But beyond that, from my experience, it's a very positive platform, and which makes sense. People are on there generally to network, and they want to put their best foot forward. There's going to be probably less griping and fake news and all of that. But it's also more substantive as well. People are sharing their thought leadership. I've learned a lot on LinkedIn. I got my current job through LinkedIn, and I don't work for LinkedIn, but I will sing their praises because I think it's a really great platform. Beyond that, some of the others, I still am a regular user of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, but my use of them has evolved over time. I will still post occasionally, but I'm more creeping than anything else, just engaging with other people's content, which is a popular pastime. I saw a number recently regarding TikTok. I think it was something like 85% of all TikTok users never post anything on the platform. They're just there consuming other people's content, which I found fascinating and yet not surprising at the same time.
Gotcha. Any final thoughts for listeners?
Yeah, I've been spending the last few years really focusing on accessible social media, and I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it here. I won't go into a whole spiel, but it's just important to note that a quarter of the American adult population has a disability. Many are blind or have low vision or deaf or hard of hearing or deafblind. And so it's important to always think about how your content is being consumed by this audience. It's a quarter of your audience, so it can't be ignored. Different platforms are implementing new functionality now, which is really exciting, like auto captions on videos. Alt text has been around for a long time, but there's a lot of other things that can be done. And the one thing I always tell people is use camel case hashtags. It's super simple, takes no additional effort. Basically, if you have a hashtag that has multiple words in it, just capitalize the first letter of each word. It just makes it so much more legible, not just for people with disabilities, but for all people. And that's just a starting point. There's so many other things you can do. I would encourage folks to check out accessiblesocial.com. It's accessible-social.com. I am not in any way tied to it. I've only recently discovered this site myself, but there are some excellent resources and tips on there. So please check that out and make sure your content is open and accessible for all people.
Well, thank you, Dan, for joining PR360 and sharing your knowledge about social media.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to PR360. As always, please subscribe to PR360 on your favorite podcasting site. Leave a 5-star review if you like this episode, and subscribe to the YouTube page. And join us next week as we talk to another great thought leader in the PR industry. All right, guys, stay safe. Get to understanding about all the different types of accessibility tech for your content and social media. And see you next week. Later.